The Vow in the Rain. The sky over the village of Omu was not blue that day. It was the color of a bruised heart. Rain fell in thick, heavy sheets, washing away the footprints of the living. But under the great Irako tree, two people stood as if the world were on fire. Kofi was a man with nothing but the strength in his back and the love in his chest. Amma was a woman whose smile could make a dying crop stand tall. They were poor. So poor that their dinner was often just a prayer and a cup of cold water. But as the thunder rolled like a giant's drum, Kofi took Amma's hands. "I will go to the city," Kofi whispered, his voice trembling against the wind. "I will work until my fingernails bleed. I will buy you gold that outshines the sun. I will buy you a house where the rain never touches your head." Amma looked at him, her eyes shining with a frightening devotion. She didn't want gold. She wanted him. "Kofi," she said, her voice a low chant, "the heart is a fragile thing. If you leave it out in the cold for too long, it turns to stone. Swear to me. Swear by the earth that feeds us." They knelt in the mud. The rain soaked their rags until they clung to their skin like a second layer of grief. Kofi picked up a handful of wet soil. "I swear by this earth," Kofi declared. "If I ever forget you, may the ground refuse to hold me. If I ever betray you, may the sun go blind. You are my beginning, and you will be my end." They shared a piece of kola nut, the bitter taste sealing their fate. As the lightning flashed, a single branch of the Irako tree snapped and fell, narrowly missing them. The village elders say that when nature speaks during a vow, it is recording the contract. Amma felt a shiver. She felt as though she had just signed her soul away. She didn't know that the man holding her hand was already looking past her, toward the bright, distant lights of a city that devours the souls of the weak. The vow was made in water, but it would be paid for in blood. For the earth was listening, and the earth never forgets a promise made in the rain. The taste of gold. The city was a monster made of stone and greed. When Kofi arrived, the smell of sweat and poverty followed him like a stray dog. But Kofi was handsome, and his eyes were hungry. He found work in the warehouse of a wealthy merchant, a man whose belly was so large it seemed to hold the wealth of 3 kingdoms. That was where he saw Zola. Zola did not walk. She floated on a cloud of expensive perfume and silk. She was the merchant's only daughter, and she looked at the world as if she owned every breath taken in it. When her eyes fell on Kofi, she didn't see a man, she saw a beautiful toy. "You," she said, pointing a finger adorned with a ring that cost more than Kofi's entire village. "Carry my silks to the carriage." Kofi obeyed. As he lifted the heavy crates, his muscles bunched under his thin shirt. Zola watched him, a wicked smile playing on her lips. She began to find reasons to see him. She gave him sweet cakes that tasted like heaven and wine that made his head spin. Slowly, the memory of Amma began to fade. The thought of his small, dusty village made him feel sick. Why go back to a hut made of mud when he could sleep in a bed of feathers? Why love a woman who smelled of wood smoke when he could have a woman who smelled of jasmine and gold? "You are too beautiful to be a laborer," Zola whispered in his ear one night, her breath hot and smelling of honey. "My father needs a son-in-law. A man who can lead. But a man like that cannot have a past. He cannot have a string tied to a village that doesn't exist on a map." Kofi looked at his hands. They were no longer rough. They were becoming soft. He tasted the gold in the air, and it was sweeter than the vow he had made in the rain. He felt a sharp pang of guilt, but he pushed it down deep into the dark corners of his mind. He told himself that Amma would find someone else. He told himself that he deserved this. The hook. He thought he was climbing a ladder to heaven, but he was only digging a hole to a place where the sun never shines. The taste of gold had turned his heart into a wasteland. The poisoned letter. Greed is a slow poison. It starts in the eyes and ends in the soul. Kofi knew he couldn't just leave Amma. She would wait for him forever. She was a woman of her word, and that made her dangerous to his new life. Zola's father had agreed to the marriage, but only if Kofi severed all ties to his former life. Kofi sat in a room lit by expensive candles, a piece of parchment before him. His hand shook. To marry Zola, he had to kill the man he used to be. And to do that, he had to kill Amma's hope. He didn't write a letter of goodbye. He wrote a letter of death. He hired a traveler, a man with a cold face and a silent tongue, to take the message to Omiu. He paid the man 3 gold coins, the price of a soul. Back in the village, the sun was setting when the traveler arrived. Amma was sitting by the path, her eyes fixed on the horizon, just as she had been every day for months. When the man handed her the letter, her heart stopped beating for a second. To the people of Omiu, the letter read, though it was written in a hand that wasn't Kofi's. Kofi, the son of the soil, has perished in a great fire at the city docks. He died calling a name that sounded like Amma. There is no body to bring home. The fire consumed everything. He is ash. He is gone. Amma did not scream. She did not cry. She fell to the ground, the letter clutched to her chest. The villagers gathered around, whispering their sorrows, but Amma heard nothing. She felt a coldness spread from her fingertips to her chest. She believed the lie. But the earth beneath her feet knew the truth. As Amma wept into the dust, the ground seemed to tremble, a low groan vibrating through the soil. Kofi was celebrating his engagement in a hall of mirrors, drinking to his new future. He thought he was free. He didn't know that by sending that letter, he had invited a curse that would follow him to the very edge of the world. The hook, a lie written in ink, is still a lie, but a lie written to break a heart is a death sentence. Kofi didn't just kill Amma's hope, he gave the earth a reason to hate him. Would you like me to continue with chapters 4, 5, and 6? The Wedding of Tears. In the city, the air smelled of roasted meats and expensive wine. Kofi stood in a tunic of pure white silk, his fingers heavy with gold. Beside him, Zola was a vision of wealth, her laughter ringing out like silver coins hitting a floor. This was the moment Kofi had traded his soul for. But miles away in the village of Omiu, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of wet earth and grief. Amma had not eaten for 7 days. She did not wash. She did not sleep. She wandered the village paths like a shadow that had lost its owner. The villagers tried to offer her porridge, but she looked through them as if they were made of glass. "He is not dead," she whispered to the wind. "The earth hasn't told me he is dead. If he were in the ground, I would feel his heartbeat through my feet." While Kofi placed a ring on Zola's finger, Amma stood under their sacred Irako tree. A sudden, violent gust of wind stripped the leaves from the branches, covering her in a shroud of dying green. At that exact moment, in the city, the wine in Kofi's glass turned the color of old blood. He stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Is something wrong, my love?" Zola asked, her eyes narrowing. "Just the heat," Kofi lied. But as he drank, the wine tasted like salt, like the tears Amma was shedding onto the dusty floor of their empty hut. The wedding guests cheered, but the shadows in the corners of the ballroom seemed to stretch toward Kofi's throat. The hook, a wedding built on a grave, is never a celebration, it is a countdown. Every laugh Kofi shared with Zola was a nail being driven into a coffin he didn't know was already being built for him. The confrontation. Amma could no longer stay in the village. The silence was screaming his name. She gathered her strength, tied a tattered cloth around her waist, and began the long walk to the city. Her feet bled. Her skin burned. She begged for scraps of bread, driven by a voice in her head that said, "He is alive. He is hiding." When she finally reached the city gates, she looked like a creature from a nightmare. Her hair was matted with dust, and her eyes were sunken pits of fire. She followed the whispers of a handsome new merchant, until she stood before a mansion with gates made of iron. The gates opened. A carriage rolled out. And there sat Kofi, draped in velvet, his hand resting on Zola's knee. "Kofi!" Amma screamed, her voice cracking like dry wood. She threw herself against the carriage. "Kofi, you are alive. The gods have brought you back." The carriage stopped. The crowd gathered. Kofi looked down at the woman he had once sworn to love forever. He saw the dirt under her nails. He saw the madness in her eyes. He felt a wave of terror. If Zola found out, his life of gold would vanish. "Who is this beggar?" Zola asked, her voice cold with disgust. Kofi looked Amma straight in the eye. His heart turned into a piece of lead. "I do not know her," he said, his voice loud and steady. "Guard, remove this madwoman from my sight before she soils my wife's dress." The guards threw Amma into the gutter. As the carriage rolled away, splashing muddy water over her face, Amma didn't cry. She began to laugh. A low, rhythmic sound that chilled the bones of everyone who heard it. She realized then that the man she loved had died long ago. Only a monster remained. The Hook. There is no fury like a heart that has been denied its own existence. Amma didn't lose a husband that day. She gained a purpose, to make sure the earth heard her scream. The last breath. Amma crawled back to the village of Omu. She did not go to her bed. She went to the center of their old hut and sat on the bare earth. She reached out and grabbed a handful of the soil, the same soil Kofi had sworn his vow upon. "You heard him," she whispered to the dirt. "You tasted his promise. He denied me. He denied the truth. Now, I give you my life so you can take his peace." She didn't use a knife. She didn't use rope. She simply closed her eyes and willed her heart to stop beating. As the life left her body, she squeezed the handful of dirt so hard that her blood seeped into it, staining the ground a dark, permanent crimson. The air in the hut grew cold. The crickets stopped chirping. A heavy, unnatural silence settled over Omu. Amma was dead, but her hand remained clamped shut around that earth. That night, back in the city, Kofi woke up gasping for air. He felt as if someone were sitting on his chest, their fingers pressing into his lungs. He looked at his hands in the moonlight and saw they were covered in phantom dust that wouldn't wash off. He tried to scream, but only a dry, rattling sound came out, the sound of a shovel hitting a stone. The Hook. A broken heart is a quiet killer, but a cursed heart is a loud ghost. Amma was gone, but she had left a message for the earth, and the earth was hungry to deliver it. The sudden news. 3 days later, a messenger from the village arrived at Kofi's mansion. He was a small man with eyes full of pity. "Master Kofi," the man said, bowing low. "The woman who claimed to know you, the one they called Mad, she is dead. She died in her hut, holding nothing but a fistful of dirt." Kofi felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his left side, right where his heart was. For a moment, he couldn't see. The world turned gray. But then, he looked at his gold watch. He looked at his beautiful house. "Why tell me this?" Kofi snapped, hiding his trembling hands. "I told you, I did not know her. Bury her in the commoner's field and be done with it. I will pay for the coffin just to show I am a man of charity." But as the messenger left, the pain in Kofi's chest didn't go away. It grew heavier. Every step he took felt like he was walking through deep mud. He tried to eat, but the food tasted like dry soil. He tried to touch Zola, but her skin felt cold, like a corpse. He told himself it was just stress. He told himself he was a winner. But deep down, in the part of his soul he hadn't sold yet, he knew. The funeral was coming, and the earth was waiting for him to step onto its stage. The Hook. You can run from a person, and you can run from a memory. But you cannot run from the very ground you walk on. The earth was preparing its jaws. The return of the traitor. Kofi arrived at the edge of Omu village not in a carriage, but on a black horse that seemed as restless as his own soul. He wore a cloak of heavy charcoal wool, hiding the expensive silk underneath. To the world, he was a successful benefactor, coming to pay for the burial of a poor woman he, pityingly, claimed to have met once. But as his horse's hooves touched the village soil, the animal screamed. It reared back, eyes rolling in terror, refusing to step further. Kofi had to dismount and walk. Every step felt like he was dragging a mountain. The air in Omu didn't move, it sat heavy and humid, smelling of stagnant water and old secrets. He saw the villagers. They stood in silence, their faces carved from granite. They didn't greet him with the cheers he expected for a rich man. They looked at his hands. They looked at his feet. They looked at the way he couldn't meet the eyes of the elders. "The body is ready," the priest said, his voice a low rattle. "But the earth is already speaking, Kofi. Can you hear it? It's been whispering since the sun went down." Kofi laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "I hear nothing but the wind, old man. Let's get this over with. I have a business to run in the city." But as he spoke, he felt a cold drip of sweat slide down his spine. He looked toward the graveyard, and for a second, he saw the grass rippling like a snake, even though there was no breeze. He came to bury his past, but the past was already digging a hole for his future. The village didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a trap. The first shovel. The procession to the graveyard was a line of shadows. Amma's coffin was a simple box of rough wood, but it felt impossibly heavy. 6 strong men struggled to carry it, their muscles straining and their breath coming in ragged gasps. Kofi stood at the edge of the pit. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. He felt a magnetic pull toward the dark opening in the ground. The priest stepped forward and offered Kofi the ceremonial first shovel. "Since you paid for the wood, you must give her back to the dust," the priest commanded. Kofi took the shovel. The wood felt freezing, like a handle made of ice. He scooped up a pile of red Omu clay and tossed it into the grave. Thud! The sound of the dirt hitting the coffin lid was like a heartbeat. But then, something impossible happened. The dirt didn't settle. It didn't spread. It simply vanished. One moment it was there, covering a corner of the wood. The next, the wood was as clean and dry as if it had just been polished. Kofi blinked, rubbing his eyes. He tried again. 2 shovels. 3. Each time, the earth hit the wood and then dissolved into nothingness. "The earth is not hungry today," a woman whispered from the crowd. Kofi's heart hammered. "It's just dry soil," he barked, his voice cracking. "Keep digging. Fill it up." The hook. You can throw 1,000,000 tons of earth into a lie, but a lie has no bottom. The grave was open, and it was watching him. The disappearing earth. The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the graveyard. 10 of the village's strongest men were now working in shifts. They brought wheelbarrows of dirt. They used massive shovels. They worked until their shirts were soaked through with sweat and their hands were blistered. The grave remained empty. The coffin sat at the bottom, mocking them. No matter how much earth they poured in, the level of the soil never rose. It was as if the grave were a mouth that swallowed the dirt and spat it out into another world. The villagers began to back away, murmuring prayers to their ancestors. "It is a curse," someone screamed. Kofi was losing his mind. He grabbed a shovel from a tired workman and began to dig frantically from the side of the pit, throwing dirt in like a madman. "Stay down," he hissed under his breath. "Stay in the dark where you belong." As he screamed, a clod of earth flew back out of the grave and hit him squarely in the mouth. He coughed and gagged, but the taste wasn't of dirt. It tasted of the bitter kola nut he had shared with Amma during their vow. He looked down at his hands and saw that the dirt he had touched was turning into black, oily ink. The hook. The more he tried to bury her, the more he exposed himself. The earth wasn't just refusing Amma, it was refusing to help Kofi hide. The elder's warning. The priest raised his staff, and the digging stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the screaming wind. He walked to the very edge of the pit, his eyes white with age and spirit sight. "Kofi," the priest said, his voice echoing as if it were coming from underground. "Listen to the soil. Do you hear that grinding sound? That is the earth sharpening its teeth." The priest knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. He stayed there for a long time while the villagers held their breath. When he stood up, his face was pale. "The earth says it will not eat a lie," the priest announced to the crowd. "It says that a woman died with a secret clamped in her fist, and until that secret is whispered into this hole, the grave will remain a gateway. It is hungry for a truth, Kofi. And if it doesn't get the truth, it will start eating the living." Kofi backed away, his heart cold. "I have no secrets." She was a stranger. A mad woman. As he said the word madwoman, the ground beneath his feet buckled. A small crack appeared in the soil, snaking toward his boots like a hungry viper. The villagers moved away from him, leaving him standing alone in a circle of judgment. The hook. The truth is a weight that eventually breaks the floor. Kofi was standing on thin ice, and the water below was full of ghosts. The night watch. The priest declared that the funeral could not continue until dawn. But there was a condition: the benefactor had to stay. According to ancient law, if a grave refuses to close, the one who ordered the burial must keep watch so the spirits don't wander. The villagers left. The priest left. Even the crickets fled. Kofi was left alone with a single lantern and the open pit. The moon rose, cold and indifferent. Kofi sat on a stone, his eyes fixed on the coffin. He tried to think of his mansion, his gold, and Zola's face. But their images were blurry, like paintings left out in the rain. Then, the whispering started. It didn't come from the woods. It came from inside the grave. "Kofi!" It was Amma's voice, but it sounded like 1,000 dead leaves scraping together. "Kofi, do you remember the rain? Do you remember the taste of the cola? You told the earth to watch you. It is watching you now." Kofi covered his ears, but the voice was inside his skull. He looked into the pit and saw the coffin lid begin to creak open, just an inch. A cold, damp mist began to pour out, smelling of the hut where Amma had died. The hook. Silence is the loudest sound when you have a guilty conscience. The night was young, and Amma had a lot to say. Zola's suspicion. Back in the city, Zola was not sleeping. She was a woman of sharp instincts. She had seen the way Kofi looked at that beggar woman at the carriage. She had seen the terror in his eyes that he tried to call disgust. She had followed him to Omu in secret, arriving under the cover of the night. She stood at the edge of the graveyard, hidden by a large baobab tree. She watched her husband cowering on a stone, talking to an empty hole in the ground. She heard him whimper. She heard him plead with the air. "I had to do it, Amma." Kofi sobbed into the dark. "The gold. I couldn't go back to the mud." Zola's blood turned to ice. She realized her perfect husband was a fraud, a man who had built his life on the corpse of a village girl. She didn't feel pity for him, she felt a burning rage. He had lied to her. He had made her a part of his filth. She stepped out from the shadows, her silk dress rustling like a snake. "So," she said, her voice cutting through the night, "the madwoman has a name, doesn't she?" The hook. When the second wife meets the ghost of the first, there is no room for the husband to hide. Kofi's two worlds were colliding, and the crash would be fatal. The blood in the soil. Kofi jumped, nearly falling into the grave. "Zola! What are you doing here? Go back. This place is cursed." "You are the curse, Kofi." Zola spat. She looked at the open grave, her eyes filled with greed and anger. She didn't believe in ghosts, she believed in control. She grabbed a heavy stone from the edge of the graveyard. "If the dirt won't stay, we will weigh it down with stone. I will not let a peasant girl ruin my reputation." She threw the stone into the grave with all her might. The moment the stone touched the coffin, a sound like a thunderclap erupted from the earth. The stone didn't just vanish, it turned into a glowing red coal. Then, the entire floor of the graveyard began to bleed. Red, thick liquid bubbled up from the soil, drenching Zola's expensive shoes. Zola screamed as the blood touched her skin. It burned like acid. She tried to run, but the mud grabbed her ankles, pulling her down. "The earth does not want your stones!" The priest's voice boomed from the shadows as he returned with the villagers. "And it does not want your gold. It wants the man who signed the contract." The villagers carried torches now, and in the orange light, the grave looked like a mouth full of fire. The stones in the pit began to glow brighter, turning the graveyard into a furnace of judgment. The hook. You cannot fix a spiritual debt with physical force. Zola tried to stone the dead, but she only set the stage for the final fire. The sky turns black. The moon did not set, it was devoured. A cloud, thick and oily like burnt hair, swallowed the stars over Omu. The village was plunged into a darkness so deep that the torches held by the villagers seemed like tiny, dying fireflies. The wind began to howl, but it didn't whistle through the trees. It roared. It sounded like 1,000 voices screaming the same name, "Kofi! Kofi! Kofi!" The trees around the graveyard began to weep. Not sap, but a thick, salty liquid that tasted like tears. The birds fell from the sky, their hearts stopping mid-flight. Nature was recoiling from the weight of the lie that sat at the center of the pit. Kofi fell to his knees, his hands clawing at his throat. He felt as if he were breathing in dust instead of air. Every time the lightning flashed, the graveyard looked different. The tombstones seemed to be moving closer, encircling him like silent judges in a courtroom of stone. The hook. When the sky turns black, it is because the sun refuses to watch what is about to happen. The universe was closing its eyes so the earth could do its work. The mirror in the grave. "Look!" a young boy shrieked, pointing into the open pit. The villagers crowded forward, their faces pale in the flickering torchlight. They didn't see Alma's wooden coffin anymore. The bottom of the grave had turned into a flat, shimmering surface, a mirror made of dark water.
In the reflection, they didn't see the graveyard. They saw a grand ballroom. They saw Kofi, dressed in gold, laughing and drinking wine. They saw him kissing Zola's hand while a letter burned in a candle nearby. They saw the traveler taking the 3 gold coins to deliver the news of a death that never happened. The villagers gasped. The truth was being played back like a silent, ghostly movie. They saw Alma's face as she read the letter. They saw her heart break in real time. "He killed her with a pen," a woman cried out. "He traded her life for a silk robe." Kofi tried to kick dirt over the mirror, but the water just absorbed his boots, pulling him toward the edge. The more he tried to hide the images, the brighter they shone. The mirror was showing the village what Kofi had tried to erase, the moment he decided that Alma was worth less than a coin. The hook, the earth, is the oldest witness. It records every footstep, every drop of blood, and every lie. Now it was playing back the tape. Underscore 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 underscore. The transformation. As the villagers watched the mirror, a terrifying change began to come over Kofi. His expensive charcoal cloak began to fray and turn gray. The gold rings on his fingers grew heavy, then soft, turning into slimy worms that wriggled off his hands and into the mud. His skin, once smooth from city lotions, began to crack and peel. Underneath the silk, his body was becoming covered in the very red clay of Omu. His fine leather boots split open, revealing feet that were stained with the dust of the long walk he had once taken away from his home. "My clothes! My gold!" Kofi wailed, clutching at his chest. But the more he grabbed at his wealth, the faster it vanished. By the time the wind died down, he was standing before the village exactly as he had been years ago, a poor man in tattered rags, smelling of wood smoke and failure. The city merchant was gone. Only the trader remained. The hook, you can dress a vulture in silk, but it still hungers for rot. The earth was stripping him back to the man who had made the vow, so he could finally pay the debt. Underscore 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 underscore. The ghostly trial. The water in the grave began to bubble and rise. Slow and steady, a figure emerged from the dark liquid. It was Alma. She did not look like the woman who had died in the hut. She was taller, her skin glowing with a faint blue light. Her hair flowed behind her like a river of ink. She didn't walk. She drifted over the surface of the open grave until she stood inches from Kofi's face. The villagers fell to their faces, too terrified to look. Only Kofi was forced to keep his eyes open. He couldn't blink. He couldn't turn away. Alma didn't scream. She didn't point a finger. She simply leaned in and whispered a question that echoed through the entire valley. "Who am I to you, Kofi?" Kofi's jaw locked. He tried to say a stranger, but his tongue felt like a hot coal. He tried to say the madwoman, but his throat constricted until he began to turn blue. The ghost of Alma reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. Her touch was colder than the deepest well. The hook, a ghost doesn't need to hit you to hurt you. She only needs to remind you of who you used to be. The trial wasn't about his crimes. It was about his memory. Underscore 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 the public collapse. The weight of the village's gaze, the ghost's touch, and the earth's hunger finally broke him. Kofi's mind snapped like a dry twig. He fell to his knees in the mud, sobbing so hard that blood began to leak from his eyes. "She was my wife," he screamed, the sound tearing through the night. "She was my life. I lied. I sent the letter. I told the guards to throw her away like trash." He confessed everything. He told them about the warehouse, the cakes, the wine, and the way he had laughed when he heard she was dead. He told them how he had enjoyed the gold even though he knew it was paid for with her spirit. With every word he spoke, the red blood in the soil began to recede. The supernatural storm began to calm. The villagers watched in horror and pity as the great man turned into a heap of shivering, broken flesh. "I am the murderer," he shrieked. "I killed the only person who ever truly loved me." The hook, the truth didn't set him free. It buried him. The moment the secret left his lips, he became a ghost himself, a man with no future and a ruined past. Underscore 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 underscore. The confession. As the final word of his confession left his lips, the word forgive, a strange thing happened. The earth, which had been spitting out dirt for 3 days, suddenly let out a long, satisfied sigh. The grave, which had been a bottomless pit of horror, began to change. The red clay started to slide back into the hole on its own. It didn't vanish this time. It settled. It covered the coffin lid with a soft, rhythmic thump thump thump. Alma's spirit began to fade, her eyes losing their vengeful fire and returning to the soft, loving gaze she had under the Irako tree. She looked at Kofi one last time, not with hate, but with a terrible sadness. She vanished into a mist that smelled of fresh rain. The villagers stood in awe. The grave was filling itself. Shovelful by shovelful, the earth swallowed the truth it had been hungry for. Within minutes, the ground was level. Alma was finally, truly buried. The hook, the earth is a fair trader. It gave back the piece it had stolen, but it demanded a high price in return. The grave was closed, but the account was not yet settled. Underscore 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 underscore. The earth's final meal. The sun began to rise over Omu, but it brought no warmth to Kofi. He stood by the closed grave, alone. Zola had fled back to the city, taking her carriage and her guards, leaving him in the dirt. The villagers walked away one by one, refusing to even look at the man who had traded a soul for a suit. Kofi tried to walk, but his legs wouldn't move. He looked down and saw that the grass around Alma's grave had grown at an impossible speed, tangling around his ankles like green chains. He was a broken man. He had no money, no wife, no home, and no honor. He sat by the headstone he had paid for with lies, and as the years passed, the village forgot he was even there. They say he became part of the landscape, a living statue of regret. The final lesson of Omu is whispered to every child. The earth does not swallow lies. It will wait. It will watch. And when it finally opens its mouth, it will not close until it has eaten the truth and the man who tried to hide it. Alma found peace in the cool, deep dark. Kofi found his hell in the bright, lonely light of the sun. Every time it rains in Omu, The dirt on that grave turns red. They say it is the earth reminding the world that some vows are written in more than just words, they are written in the soil itself. Underscore 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 and 4.